Welcome to the BlockCrunch podcast, the go-to podcast for investors and builders in crypto. Before we get started with today's episode, I've got some great news for our listeners. For those of you looking for an extra edge in crypto, we created BlockCrunch VIP just for you. Every week, our team at BlockCrunch prepares an in-depth research memo with a sector analysis, project explanation, competitor breakdown, and our own in-house investment outlook for every project brought onto the show, delivered straight to your inbox. We'll do the work so you don't have to. We'll scour Discord, Twitter, forums, and blogs and help you highlight potential catalysts and provide actionable insights for every project we interview. In addition, we'll also host exclusive AMAs with myself to answer any of your questions. And all of that is only available to BlockCrunch VIP subscribers. But the good news is that it costs less than a coffee a week. So head on over to theblockcrunch.com/VIP or click the link in the show notes below to sign up. All right, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the BlockCrunch podcast. Now, a lot of you have been asking for more content on the Metaverse, and I realized that we actually haven't done a really great job defining just what the Metaverse is. So I'm really excited to dive into the deep end of that with the founder of one of the more prominent Metaverse projects out there. So I'm really excited to have Ahad, the co-founder of Webaverse, which is one of the more popular Metaverse projects that's coming up, and they've been building for quite a while. And I've actually gotten a personal demo of the virtual world that they're building as well, and I was really excited about what they're working on. So really excited to have Ahad on the show to talk to us about all things Metaverse. So this is going to be a very broad conversation about virtual reality, about virtual worlds, about digital communities, and social identity in on the blockchain. So incredibly excited for this. Ahad, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Jason, for having me. Really excited to be on this podcast. Um, so let's start with the $1 million question these days, which is what is Metaverse? And everyone has a bit of a different take on it. But from our perspective, it's very simple. That as of right now, our world is governed looking through 2D text-based interfaces, right? And realistically speaking, many of us spend 8 to 12 hours a day in front of these 2D text-based interfaces, right? We personally believe that technology is moving in such a direction that we are going to evolve from these 2D text-based interfaces into more interacting and engaging mediums. Now, this is one of the more complex things about what we call the metaverse, is that it is going to be cross-medium, it is going to be cross-platform. For example, when I say cross-medium, is basically, it can be in 2D, it could be on a 2D screen, within that it could be 3D, it could also be in virtual reality, and it could be in augmented reality. That is what makes the real challenge of making the software also very difficult. Typically in computers, if you look at it, generally the hardware is more difficult. That's why you will see a few companies being able to do it over the past 2-3 decades, and the software is generally easier. But in this case, I would think that both the hardware and the software are quite difficult. So yeah, we are going to move from these 2D text-based interfaces to more engaging, interactive applications, right? So we talked about cross-medium and then cross-application. So when I say that, basically, we have become too fragmented, right? Like there's an app store, and every app store has their own rules and everything, right? Um, we also saw a big fiasco happening with Fortnite, Epic Games and Apple battling that out. And
What
because
happened with the Fortnite situation?
So the Fortnite situation was, just to give a quick recap, is that they introduced a payment feature on for Apple devices as well, and that payment feature was basically redirecting from the App Store directly to the Epic Games platform, and as a result of that, you would not be paying a certain commission to Apple. And because of that, a legal battle continued between Apple and Epic Games. And unfortunately, I mean, people can interpret it different ways, but realistically speaking, Epic Games lost that battle. and it was ruled in Apple's favor that they can continue on collecting that tax of 30%. And as a result, Fortnite was not present on Apple platforms for a long time, and I think now only recently they have started introducing basically a Google Stadia kind of service, which runs on the cloud. But the reality is that these experiences do suffer from jitter, latency, and that's why it cannot be applied for competitive gaming in many contexts. So now we have too many app stores, right? Like in every app store, they are the gatekeeper. They come up with their own rules and regulations, um, and we see that as unsustainable. And because of that comes the name Webaverse, which was like, okay, let's go back to the basics, right? If we go to Web one, like forget even Web two, Web three. By the way, I personally don't believe in like this terminology, Web one, Web two, Web three. Web is just the web. But these are good, marketing frameworks for us to understand. So let's go back to Web one, right? Like Web one was quite permissionless. Web one was all about hosting your own website, etc. Um, and for us, it is all about going back to that basics. That okay, we let's build on the web, because when you build on the web, it's just a URL. You don't have to go through any app store, and it can be accessed by anyone, which gives you your own freedom because you don't have to like follow any app stores. Plus it also makes it on a philosophical level like censorship resistant, etc. So we decided to build this concept of the metaverse on the web, because it solves these two things which I was telling you: cross medium and cross platform. Because cross medium is at the end of the day, a website works on your mobile, it works in your VR, it works in AR, it works on your desktop, laptop, everything, right? And similarly, once you do that, you circumvent all the app stores. Now, for a lot of people, they would say that okay, but the web is may have its limitations, right? Because we generally have not seen full comprehensive games being built on the web. And to that point, anyone who's like looking at the arc of technology, actually technology is moving in such a way that we will be able to run everything just on the browser. And the main thing which is supporting that is WebAssembly. What WebAssembly does is that you can write your code in any language, and then you can use WebAssembly to basically ensure that it is able to run on the web through a browser. So yeah, that's the core principle on which we started building Webaverse. We believe that technology took a certain direction, that everybody moved to the app store model, right? Like to the model of publishing everything on the app store, giving those commissions because it was very convenient. Um, and for that, we had to rebuild things. So the first thing which we had to rebuild was our own game engine on the web, 100% open source. It's just a URL. It right now it opens up your desktop, laptop. It will work on your mobile as well. It works in VR, and we have some interesting AR features coming as well. Right. Of course, it's not as feature packed as your more established game engines like Unity, but it's still much feature packed than comparing it to other web based engines like Play Canvas, etc. Right. So that's the game engine layer which we have built, 100% open source. And then we have a few other things on top of the stack, which I can go in once we dive deeper into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that comprehensive overview. So there's a lot to unpack here, Had. So I'm really interested in the why and also the how. And so let's start with the why first. So you guys are building a browser-based virtual 3D world for people to explore in. So do you see this as a natural extension of what people are already doing on like social network sites like Facebook and Twitter, and this is a more comprehensive version of that, or is this something else entirely?
I think it's a mix of you take the concept of social media, of these apps which you talked about, Facebook, etc., and you merge them with games. Um, to go a bit onto our stack, right? Like I talked about the game engine. On top of that layer, we've created a platform layer, so sort of like Roblox, which makes it super easy for people to build their own user generated content, to bring in their own user generated content. It's following along the same philosophies of games like Minecraft, Roblox, but we're just applying next generation technologies, right? So these user generated content could be avatars, weapons, wearables, vehicles. They could be entire environments, scenes. Um, and it's very intuitive for it to work in Webaverse. You can simply drag and drop stuff in. It works, or you can connect your wallet and bring it as an NFT, right? Like right now, we are able to pull data from any EVM based chain, whether it's an L1 or an L2. But we plan to be cross chains as well in the future. Um, so it doesn't stop here, right? And this is the crazy thing, which I don't talk about a lot on many of our podcasts because people do think that we are crazy. We believe that the metaverse will become, it's inevitable, firstly. And a lot of people, when they think about metaverse, right, they think about that, okay, it's going to be there because of technologies like AR, VR, or right, like maybe we'll have a game. I think the key feature which is going to make metaverse is AI. Why I say AI is because you imagine that you go in a world and you just give voice commands, and with that voice command, a new world is generated. It is filled up with NPCs, and you can define how these NPCs behave and act. What it unlocks is infinite content creation. And because of that infinite content creation, anybody becomes a creator, and you are able to start creating applications in this metaverse context, which I was earlier talking about, that moving from these 2D text based interfaces. And once you give this power to creators, then you start seeing a range of applications which start appearing across not only gaming, but in terms of the broad verticals. I would talk about social, entertainment, education, and some aspect of economics slash finance as well, right? Some of these use cases, I would say, are very intuitive. So, for a minute, let me talk about education, right? Um, if you were teaching a kid about the solar planet, the Milky Way, or and like imagine that the kid just puts on his VR headset or AR headset and is able to visualize all of those planets, right? Is able to actually like float around the Milky Way. That's a much better learning experience than just showing them on a book, right? Similarly, you can apply the same concept for just looking at the atomic structure, right? Like electrons, protons, quarks, etc. It's a much more intuitive um, learning experience compared to just reading via textbook or just looking at a textbook. So yeah, that's how we have built Webaverse. That we build it in as open way as possible. On one hand, it is super easy for people to make their entire experience. The earliest adoption would be kind of like game and gamified experience, but we believe that other kind of applications will also be built on top of it. And on the other hand, if somebody wants to totally customize our code base and work with that, they are able to do it because it's open source. And that's the beauty about open source, right? And also, it's not just open source. Even like if you look down our stack, we also try to work with open source ingredients so that there's no risk of deplatforming. Um, and on top of that, we also work with open standards, which is the philosophy of the web, right? Like a PNG works everywhere, a JPEG works everywhere. So you just take that same concept of open standards, and that not only allows us to work with interoperability, it also allows us to do a lot of things much more effectively with AI. Because once you start standardizing everything, and when you talk about standardizing, it's not just we're not just talking about the file formats, we're also talking about the code. We're also talking about the way we code. Because in that format, it's much easier for the AI systems to be able to read them.
And I love to kind of dive deeper into this why we're building a metaverse here because I don't doubt the importance or the impact of having very immersive experiences through VR, but I do think the argument for metaverse is slightly separate. So I'd love to kind of dive deep into why do we need to build all of these immersive experiences inside one world? Because right now I think the current stage of VR, there are educational resources in VR, but they exist as separate apps. So, how important is it to host all of these education or commercial or game use cases in one unified virtual world versus a lot of different apps on a store?
Yeah. So I'll split this question into two parts, right? So the first question is the why. Why do we even need to build um, these interactive experiences, right? Like, what's the reason for that? There's actually a research paper. I cannot remember it, otherwise I would share it with you right now as well. And it does an experimentation of, right, like of social experience, um, and they just try to judge that, which is a more natural way, and like how it is perceived. So basically they do a live one with like people in the same room, then they do it on a Zoom call, just like what we are doing right now, um, and then they start doing it in VR as well. And in VR they do it like two separate experiments. The one is that embodied VR. Basically, there's a body, and the other is non-embodied VR, which is, you could just be a block or whatever, right? Like, but you're still able to, people can see you. And then the next one is bodied or non-body, like not without a body, but you're able to interact with the objects in the space, right? Um, and obviously, it doesn't have to be in VR. You could do it in a game as well, right? Um, and consistently, the best social engagement is real life, the experience which you get real life in with proximity with a person. And the second best experience is always in a space, whether it's in VR or in 3D, where there's a sense of social presence, which means that basically, actually, it's not even that important to be embodied. Like, embodied one is better, but it's important that people are able to manipulate their the environment, the shared environment, right? um, Not only it creates for like a stronger engagement between everyone in the room, but it also, like the research which shows that it's a better medium for creativity, etc., etc., right? And the reason why it is very intuitive, because as human beings we actually operate in an immersive space. It's only because of the rise of computers that we have started like restricting ourselves and communicating through these 2D text-based interfaces, right? So it's a natural evolution. Now this is the research. Anecdotally, like my personal experience, and I've tried this, and I would invite everyone listening to this podcast, and you yourself as well, Jason, try this out. In a party, just go to like groups of people and like strike this conversation that what is your fondest memory of a computer application. Somebody will talk about Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, right? And then you say, okay, what about games? Everyone, at that moment, everyone will click, oh, games are included, computer application. Oh, yeah. And then, everyone, almost everyone, will have fond memories of a computer application, which is a game.
Mm,
The reason is that the design principle of game has always been on engagement, whereas the design principle of all of the applications which quote unquote we have been using in Web 2 is based on convenience, right? I mean, I know this very well. I worked at Apple. The whole design principle is around simplicity and convenience.
mm,
Now, with Gen Z and, like the generation after that and all, for them, like, first of all, like they're literally born with these digital tools. It's a very intuitive experience for them, right? They can do, like, they don't get flustered by it. They don't need convenience. Like, you can give them a very hard to navigate kind of a user experience digitally, and they will do it because they are born into this. So yeah, that's the why that we are naturally going to go into all of these things. Um, now, the second part of the question is that what is the advantage which we get if all of these experiences are interoperable.
Mm.
That's kind of what you were trying to allude to, right?
Yes.
So my and it's actually the story of how I joined Webaverse.
Mm.
So like I was working, I was involved with startups. I got into crypto very early on, 2014 and all. And 2 3 years ago, I could see the super cycle metaverse which was coming, because I was working at Apple. I could see the arc of technology which was going in that direction. And the most important thing for me at that point was that this is the real use case for crypto. This is where rubber hits the road. Because like crypto at the end of the day is internet money, and you need an internet society for that internet money to be consumed, right? Like, we have tried lots of other force fitted use cases, in DeFi and all of that, and I just find them force fitted. For me, like, metaverse was a very natural evolution to it. And at that time, basically, I started looking into Metaverse, which were the startups who were doing a lot of like interesting stuff, and I came across Webaverse, and a lot of practical writings on Metaverse at that time was coming via Webaverse, and this was way before the gold rush. Facebook had not announced and changed its name. There was nothing like that. And at the time, I saw a demo from my current co-founder, Avier. It's present on YouTube as well. The
Mm.
talk is titled "Free Association in the Metaverse," and basically, what he does in it is that he does it in VR, but you can do it elsewhere as well. And he goes from like conventional games like VR Chat, Minecraft, No Man's Sky. He goes from like one game to the other, and he's using inventory items of games as 3D NFTs 2 years ago, from one game to the other. And he's socializing with the multiplayers and all. And later part of the chat, he basically talks about that how the metaverse is actually a medium for storytelling and infinite creation, right?
Mm.
So this extent, and at that time it clicked to me, right? The reason why the benefit we get from an interoperable metaverse is the same reason is what makes the internet so powerful, is that you can literally navigate from one website to the other, right? There are no limits, there are no boundaries. If we become like, games have like different designs, different, but you should have the ability to be able to go from one to the other, because that enables us to have infinite design possibilities. Whereas if we restrict ourselves, like, we just restrict ourselves. um, and as I said, right, like, this particular technological revolution, it's going to be so fragmented because of what I talked about earlier, right? Like cross platform and cross medium. It's going to be so fragmented that if you're able to stitch all of those mediums together, you're able to create, first of all, widely accessible applications. Secondly, you're able to create like applications which do not discriminate. For example, I don't believe that, even though I believe that Apple is going to come up with a killer headset, right? Like, I'm personally very bullish on it. That company just knows how to produce technology at scale. They understand the consumer adoption curve. That said, I don't believe that VR or AR it's going to get mainstream even when Apple releases its headset, right? Like, there's going to be a slow adoption curve. And at that time, it's extremely important for these applications to be interoperable, because otherwise, we'll be making for a very small segment,
Mm. So
right?
so that's why you guys are building on a web browser, not just VR.
Correct. Now, these are the things which are in the short term. Now, I would invite you to go a bit longer term. And these things sound crazy to us, but trust me, it's a matter of when, not if. And you go into a sci-fi future, right? And these are the kind of futures which we have seen in a lot of like fictional books, movies, etc. And most of these paint us a dystopian future to us. You don't want to be creating a system which is basically at the core platform level is gatekeeping. in any way possible, right? You don't want that, okay, this is the world. It's the same thing as saying that, okay, I'm building this street and only people who have this much money can cross this street, right? You should at least like add an infrastructure layer possible. You should open up all the possibilities, and then on top of that, people who are building, they can design their own gates, etc., right? But we want to provide an opinion agnostic infrastructure layer.
Hey guys, I'm really excited to tell you more about one of my favorite products in crypto right now, DYDX. This is a team I've known since 2018, and they've built one of the best exchange venues out there that also happens to be decentralized and mobile friendly. Now listen until the end because there's an opportunity for savvy traders out there as well. And here are just a few reasons why I like DYDX over other exchanges. First, it's very liquid. It processes $2 to $3 billion every day in volume and has 35 perpetual swaps as of this recording, which means you can trade things like Ethereum, Bitcoin, Doge, Solana, and most of the most popular assets with up to 20x leverage in the venue today. Now second, it's also extremely cheap. And if you're down bad from the bear market, you don't have to worry about gas fees at all because there is no gas fee on Starkware Layer 2 where DYDX is built on. Now that brings me to my next point as well. It's incredibly fast. Unlike other layer 2 and high-speed DEXs, you don't actually have to wait to withdraw your assets anymore. And as an additional point, by using Starkware, DYDX also provides user with increased security and privacy. And my personal favorite feature is the cross-margin feature, which means I can seed one account with USDC and trade across multiple markets from there without needing to start sub-accounts because I really hate managing so many different sub-accounts. And their iOS mobile app is also live right now, and it's amazing because it's compatible with MetaMask, Coinbase Wallet, Coin98, Huobi Wallet, and a lot of the most popular mobile wallets out there. And it's available for people outside of the US or sanctioned countries today. And one last thing, one exciting opportunity is their competitions. The most recent tier in the $10,000 equity tier have won over $95,000 in rewards. And you can get started with as low as $500 in equity to compete for prizes. So if you're already trading, might as well get paid to do it. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend that you head on over to dydx.exchange to learn more. And I thank them for sponsoring this episode. That makes a lot of sense. And I'd love to kind of wrap up this part about the why because there's so much to unpack on the how as well. So I think one thing you'd mentioned that was really, really interesting was this point about your co-founder using NFTs of items in games and carrying them across the game because he owns those NFTs and he can bring them around. And to me, that really seems to be the core of what the metaverse is because the idea of these social games doesn't seem to be new, right? There's Club Penguin, there's Second Life, but then the key difference there seems to be this concept of ownership, that you can actually own the things in the game and there's no risk of you being deplatformed. Would you say that is like the core defining trait of a metaverse versus like a social game like a Club Penguin?
Um, I think there are like that's the core thing of a blockchain powered metaverse, not metaverse, because I think the metaverse is, as I said, right, like the reason metaverse is going to exist because we are at a very interesting time in history where a lot of technologies are coming to an inflection point. And that is, like hardware, internet speed, um, even socially, right? Like digital ownership, assets, like all of these things are coming at an inflection point, which is why metaverse will exist. But the metaverse powered via blockchain, the reason is pretty simple. First of all, it's only intuitive, right? Like that we put so much emphasis on rights in the physical world. I mean, if you go via the American, like First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, somewhere there in the Second or Third Amendment, they talk about the right to own, right? Like the right to own property. It's the same concept, and you just take that into the virtual world because at the end of the day, people should have a right to own. Now that's on the right aspect, right? Now thinking of it at a bit more like zooming out and thinking a bit more like socially, what it results in is efficiency, is results in um, um, like optimization, right? Like for example, if you make an inventory item which works in one game, you just don't have to reinvent the wheel for the other one, right? Like these things, as I said, right, interoperability. A lot of people, especially in the gaming space, they will be like, oh, but it doesn't work this way. You haven't ever made a game, etc., etc. I We don't believe that interoperability is like magic, that it is just going to work. You have to make a lot of effort to make it work. What I mean by that is that like few games will have to start proving the concept that it works between them internally. Then a few others will join, and that's how it will happen, right? Like it's not that it's just gonna happen by itself. Um, but yeah, as I said, right, like it just results in efficiency, it results in richer like overall design possibilities. And that's what excites me, right? Like yeah.
Yeah, and I love to kind of move on to the how as well because there's a lot to talk about there. So obviously the metaverse concept has become very popular ever since Facebook, announced to pivot the entire company in that direction. And there's been a lot of metaverse companies that are coming out right now to build these virtual worlds. And a lot of them are starting with a with the same kind of very grand vision as well. But when it comes to kind of onboarding the users, who do you think will be the first, say, like 100,000 or even the first 1,000 true fans to use this platform? Like, what is the go to market to scale something this grand?
Yeah, I wish that it's Webaverse. But that being said, the way we see Metaverse is very simple. It is a sum of our collective imagination. Deep down, inside every human being, inside every kid, inside everyone who's even a bit older, there is a fantasy. And the Metaverse is a place which lets us enable and build these fantasies. For example, if you go in, like 1,000 years, past 1,000 years, 2,000 years, history is full of examples of like kings and queens and princesses that they had some, desire and they had the resources, and just to do that, they built something, like Taj Mahal, um, Gardens of Babylon, etc., etc. Right? The metaverse enables this to be built by everyone, or if not everyone, at least a much broader class of people. Because building in the virtual world is much easier than building in the physical world, right? Just because of physics, resources, etc. So imagine that and like to answer your question, right? Like I personally think uh, that similar to Minecraft, Roblox, the platform which is able to onboard the most number of creators is going to win. Because at the end of the day, the most humility based factor for these platforms should be that we have an idea that what the technology and metaverse is going to be, but we don't know exactly what it is going to be. So once you actually build a platform in a very open way which is creator friendly, then you just let people build on top of it, right? Because it's the same thing as like you go back 20, 25 years, nobody could have predicted that a photo sharing application would be such a big thing, right? Like you had the app store. The app store, you could build anything, you could just list it, and it worked. Similarly for like WhatsApp, Uber, all of those things. So it's the same thing, right? Like I think that 100,000 users and all of that is going to be based on any platform which is able to attract lots of creators, lots of builders. And what are the factors for that? Of course, you need to be able, and there are several layers to it, right? For the builders, it needs to be very easy to use, right? Like, and that is one of the design principles on which we have built Webaverse, is that you can drag and drop stuff in and you can create a world. You can literally create a MMO game within days. You should be able to like, we haven't finished that part, but it's about to finish, that you'll be able to like drag and drop stuff, do some like gameplay scripting right in the world in there, right? Like basically just typing two three simple commands or like user based interfaces. Similarly for npcs, you can drag and drop a 3D object, you can define it as an npc, you can give it a bit of backstory and a lore, and then you have an AI driven npc which can evolve in the game with its own memory, etc. as well. right? And then, which is the eventual goal, is that you might have seen, some of the results of Dolly, right? Like and like just take that concept into 3D. Literally, like people will be able to go in the world and just say stuff and things will be created, right? So from my perspective, I think um, all metaverse platforms should be very humbling and say that, okay, we don't know what the metaverse is going to be, and if they want to like make this thing into a reality, they should be talking to more creators, more builders, and just empower them, right? Empowering through tools is one thing which I talked about. The second thing, and I think that's where the open source ethos also makes a lot of difference, is that there's a lot of challenges with open source, right? Like we know there are a lot of people who look up to us, and in fact, we know a lot of people who have just like looked at us and they've tried to make something and even raised millions on top of that as well, right? Which is great. Why do we still continue being open source? Because we personally believe that once the open source aspect starts taking adoption, it spreads like wildfire, right? And it's the same for Linux as well, right? Like started as open source, continued for a while, but when it got adoption, it is irreplaceable where it runs. So that's the second aspect. The third aspect, where I believe that um, the metaverse will, and where some other like non Web3 platforms will suffer, is the ownership part, where blockchain comes in. It's simple human psychology that if you have ownership of something, you put in much more effort behind it.
And
It's just like, I mean, you've been in venture investing. It's the core rule of entrepreneurship. When you have the ownership, people put everything behind it. So that's the thing about Webaverse, and I mean other metaverse, blockchain-based metaverse as well. Not all, but for Webaverse, we built it in such a way that whatever you build is yours. Like your assets are yours. You can monetize it however you want. You can govern it however you want. You can token gate it however you want. And yeah, I think the ownership is the sweetener, which is going to enable people to do a lot of these stuff, because once you own things, you do it for yourself.
yeah, and I think one of the things that I think many people are skeptical about for virtual worlds is that there's a chicken and egg problem where without a compelling gameplay, you can't draw users in, especially if you have to rely on user generated content, right? People don't want to create stuff for a world where there are no users, and if they don't create experiences, there are no users who will come. So, how do you break out of that chicken and egg and bootstrap the platform?
Upstreet. Okay, so this is the part where Upstreet comes in. Um, basically a Webaverse game engine. On top of that, a platform, which is what I talked about, super easy to create user generated content. On top of that, we are launching with Upstreet. Upstreet, simplest explanation I can give: Final Fantasy meets Roblox.
Hmm.
And the core idea is that Upstreet progresses in seasons. Every season has a loose theme, a loose storyline. And the idea about Upstreet is that creators and communities can build their own worlds, can build their own games, which is part of one larger game, one larger meta game, and where we create our first party experiences for people to be engaged. Now, as I mentioned, that since Upstreet progresses in season, as part of every season, there are two phases. I mean, there are other as well, but broadly speaking, two phases. One is the development phase, and the other is the gameplay phase. In the development phase, we help creators and communities build their own experiences, basically through like community driven sessions, tutorials, as well as we give them a lot of assets which they can remix, where CCO assets come in. So that's the development phase, and then we move to the gameplay phase, right? And in the gameplay phase, the idea is that we have our own first party experiences, but at the same time there are a lot of user generated first party experiences as well, which keeps on evolving. Once again, as I have mentioned earlier, that this is the part where AI becomes very important, because we use AI to stitch a lot of these stories in real time. So the idea is that how you're able to stitch these stories in real time to create a role playing game. Um, and that's what we're doing, right? Like, and you're 100% right. Like, you have to bootstrap these things, right? And it's actually, and you have been seeing, and I'll give you a very, there's already some proof of concept for this. At the end of the day, people need to be inspired, even though we haven't like finished up our final tooling layer and all. But if you look at our Twitter, we do a lot of live development and we post a lot of our stuff on Twitter. And as a result of that, you can even see right now people are creating dope experiences on Webaverse, even though we haven't even finished our final layer yet, final tooling layer yet. The reason being is that people see those things and they get inspired, right? And that's a similar concept that our first party experience, when people see those first party experience and the people who are part of Upstreet, they actually have right to all of those assets. They have right to all of the Upstreet related code as well, and they can use those code to be able to remix and build their own stuff.
Hmm. And I love to talk about that ownership aspect as well, because I know you guys are doing an NFT drop with different parcels in Webaverse, and also there is a token. So can you talk about how those two elements fit into bootstrapping this community?
Sure. So the idea about like the Upstreet NFT drop is very simple. That you have the NFT, and you're part of the Upstreet slash Webaverse ecosystem, right? It's just one NFT which you need to have. With that NFT, it's kind of like a season pass, you can call it. Um, and with that NFT, you can claim procedurally generated worlds. You can either take that world, you can terraform it, you can put some assets on top of it, or you can replace that entire world with your own little whatever you can want to build, right? And this world, you can token gate it. You can define your own rules. You can define your own monetization rules, etc. It's because it's yours. Like literally, it's yours. All we're expecting is that, hey guys, there is a cost for us to provide these services to you, and that's what the NFT gets you. It's more like, with this we let you host. If you have the NFT, you can host, you can build stuff and you can host it. So that's a part of the NFT. Now the Silk token, and it will come in later, but Silk is basically the currency which is you can use to trade within the game. And there's going to be a marketplace and all of that stuff as well. We already have it, but we just want to improve it. And the idea is that everything which people are building, they want to monetize, they can use Silk to be able to do it. There's some element which you can earn Silk via the core gameplay, the first party experience which we are building as well. But our aspect of the tokenomics is very simple. I personally don't believe in the hyper Ponzinomics based games which have come out in crypto, because it's simple. They just rely on one thing, which is new users. And that music stops. That is the reality of it. That music stops, right? Like it cannot go on forever. Our aspect is very simple. We look at it as a economy, like a real world economy. And what are the things which you need to see in a real world economy? How much value is being created, and what is the velocity of money? Basically, how quickly money is changing between hands, the value is being exchanged. And based on those two concepts, Silk is generated. It's not generated on any other factor. It's generated on value being created within the system.
Hmm. And I
Value
think
being created, value being exchanged. Basically, these two things.
one really clever thing that I think you guys are doing that we didn't touch on is the fact that you're partnering with projects like Tubby Cats, Doodles, Waziverse, so projects with existing and dedicated and financially aligned communities already, and you're basically giving them the platform to build out these worlds. Um, so, can you maybe talk a little bit about why you guys decide to pick these NFT projects and how you guys specifically work with projects to build their virtual worlds?
Yeah. So, first part is that, see, NFTs are a shelling point for digital communities. People identify with their apes, people identify with their doodles. That's just reality, right? So for us, it was a very natural extension to be able to like build for these or like partner extensively with them. At the same time, it's not just that we are working with these NFT projects. It's just that these partnerships are a bit more visible because they are so vocal, right? Like the rest of the people, like for example, if I'm working with an individual artist or a business, for example, we are also working with a business which wants to use the metaverse to do a lot of brand activation. And these guys are just not so vocal, right? But to your point, you got it right. Like these are digital communities and they need a digital place. Simple as that, right? So it's very, that's why like we are partnering with them, and now it has become like, even though you see these partnership posts and all, Webaverse is open for all. It's just like these communities specifically, they're helping us spread the word, like, and that's why you see these posts. But it's not like that if we have not partnered with someone, they cannot be part of it, right? Like all they have to do is just have our NFTs, and that's great. Now the second aspect, which you asked, like how we are helping them build. Um, we are already helping them. We already have some sort of a documentation in place. It will just get more comprehensive over time. um, but the key thing is that, as I said, like Upstreet drop, you get our NFT, and with our NFT, we basically guide you to build your own experience. We guide everyone who has our NFT through our community-driven sessions. But for example, let me just give a very quick example that for Voiceverse, right? Like let's say that everybody who has as a Webaverse slash Upstreet NFT, they can vote for three projects which they want to be built on Webaverse, right? And let's assume that Voiceverse gets greater than 50 votes, right? Like anybody who gets more than 50 votes, we provide them dedicated resources ourselves, so that like these big experiences can be built, because they kind of become like a more flagship experience, and we would want to put some attention on them so that they're great and they can inspire more to be built.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know besides a computer science degree, you also have a business degree. So I'd love to ask the business question, which is, how does Webaverse make money? Or is the intention to be a business?
It's at the core level, it's the NFTs which we are going to be, like the Upstreet NFT. Then we will do a few other NFTs as well, and you'll start to realize that Webaverse is. We think of Webaverse as more like a record studio model, right? So from Webaverse, we will be launching a few experimental NFTs, which will be around like music, games, all of these things, right? But it'll be a highly curated collection. But more around like everything around Metaverse, right? Like not just like your plain JPEG, which needs some sort of interactivity. That's the part. The other aspect is I told about the marketplace as well, that will be generating some revenue, like a tax based model, similar to OpenSea. So these are our two primary main sources of revenue. And the third one is that we will be partnering with other projects to be launching their own NFTs on our platform. And that's very exciting stuff, which I cannot share right now too much. But and it's a bit longer term as well. But in the immediate, it's going to start with the NFTs, then it's going to move to the marketplace model. But this is the long term sustainability we are thinking.
That's amazing. And as we close up the conversation here, Ahad, what are some things that people who are excited about Webaverse can look forward to, and what are some things they can do today?
Well, if you're a creator builder, please get in touch with us. Go through our documentation. Start building in Webaverse today, right? Like tag us. If you're a creator builder, we would just love to onboard you, because as I said, we have built Webaverse as an open canvas, and we want everyone to write their stories. Upstreet is our little contribution of like writing some of the story, and we write all of the story together. That's the first thing. Second thing, follow us on Twitter. We are most vocal on Twitter. We use Twitter as our chatter. We just talk about everything on Twitter. We share a lot of our development on Twitter as well. Third thing is look out for our NFT drop. Uh, it's going to happen within June/July. We are already racing towards it. The reason we have not officially released a date, because we want everything to be ready first. After that, we'll release the date, because I've just seen that happen a lot with many NFT projects, that they actually like tell the date and it always gets delayed.
Yep,
Uh,
yep.
that's the thing. But the more core important thing I want to say to everyone, that hey guys, metaverse is a reality. Don't question it anymore, but start building this metaverse on open principles. And I think the metaverse needs everyone's participation. So the more people participate, the more diverse it will be. And we are in an interesting point in history. Technology is not constant, thanks to COVID, thanks to remote work, and the overall trend. Technology is not concentrated in one aspect of the world, like in one geography of the world. It has moved out of Silicon Valley, within America, internationally as well. And that is what I'm very excited about, because these values will now be represented in in products, right? Like, it's not just built by a small segment of people for the entire world. And that is the interesting thing, right? Like, metaverse will have a lot of great Asian art, a lot of great African art, and yeah, everyone should try to think about how they can contribute to the metaverse, whether they want to build on Webaverse, on other platforms. But I would urge everyone to start taking part in this, because it's a reality, and the more people participate in it, the more diverse, and the more, I would say, fun it will be. Because I personally believe that one person or a few people, if they build something, is just going to be boring, because there's going to be an element of homogeneousness to it. Whereas, if multiple people build, it's going to be very diverse.
Absolutely. And now, as a newly unemployed person, I'm going to have a lot more time on my hands. So I can't wait to dive into all of this metaverse technology and contribute to the future. So, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show, Ahad. It's been really fun.
Thank you so much, Jason.